Hello Internet, this is Whispering Whim, and today we have an extra special video. It's special for two reasons. The first being that this is a bonus video because I got 300 subscribers. Now, I know in YouTube land and on the internet, 300 people isn't supposed to be that many, but the way I look at it is that there were 300 people who not only watched a video of mine, but they watched it long enough to be like, I want to hear more of this. Subscribe. And that's amazing, you guys. Doesn't matter if some other person has like 500,000 or 20 billion or more views, right? What matters is that it's the most people I've ever interacted with. So that's reason number one. Now, reason number two is that the topic of today's video is a little different. We're going to cover some needle felting. And I have a big old, I have like a million things that I want to say about it. But before we get too far in, because this is a ASMR video, I kind of wanted to give you guys a quick preview of what it sounds like. So it's kind of, I would describe it as like a crunchy noise, right? And there's going to be a lot of that. It's actually the sound is one of the things that made me like nervous about doing an ASMR video for this particular craft, but it's very near and dear to my heart. I do a wide variety of needle felt creatures. Some of them are very simple. Let's find a simple guy like this. These little eggies, they have a weight on them that makes them stand up, and this is like my most popular item. It's kind of hilarious. That's something that Basic really appeals to people. So I also do some more almost realistic, could be a little more realistic if I was saying it was realistic. How many times can I say realistic in a row? So, normal, natural animals. And as you can see here, this is my newest and most elaborate piece I have ever made. It took me almost a whole month to do. And when you see how long it takes me to do something simple, you'll kind of understand why it took a whole month. But this is a flamingo dragon. He's all wired up, so he can be slightly posed. There's some limitations, like you can't do like the flamingo up on one foot a thing, but you can adjust the head a little bit, and the beak is made from a special clay that is flexible, so you won't damage if he accidentally falls. And look at this, all these feathers I made by hand. They're all made from wool, and they have wires in them, so I can actually move every individual feather and create a, dynamic sort of wingspan. So we're not going to do anything that crazy for this video. We're going to start with the simplest of the simple, and that is a little handheld blob monster. But anyways, without much further ado, we're gonna pop into a top-down view, still in my kitchen, unfortunately. Forgive all the oils and utensils that are in the background. Anyways, let's just go on over. Okay, so this is our temporary felting station set up in the kitchen. I have my felting surface. This is a pad that's put out by a company called Wool Buddy, and I've just covered it in some gray gauze to make it a little more camera friendly. It's like the world's ugliest yellow brown. Oh no, let's not do that. But anyways, I was gonna unwrap it, but I forgot that I taped it. But anyways, so it's a sturdy, good pad, but they are not pretty, especially when you use them a lot and they start getting all the different colors kind of mixed into them. Off to the side, we have our different felting needles, and I do use all of these, but today we're really going to concentrate on this green guy. He's going to be the star of the show here. We're making a very, very simple project, so there's no need to get super fancy with all the needles. The wool that I'll be using today is an off-white core wool and some MC1. Both of these are from livingfelt.com, so I'll try to remember to link that in the description below in case you want to go check them out yourself. And that is enough of an introduction. I really do want to get started because otherwise I could probably lecture. Oh my goodness. In fact, I've tried to lecture about felting, and I've had to stop recording like, I don't know, at least half a dozen times because I wasn't actually making anything. And I feel like for ASMR and relaxing, I should actually be doing something. So let's do something. I've taken a small piece of my core wool and I'm just going to kind of wrap it up a little bit into a ball. This will be kind of our smallest base layer. And I am using the needle to stab all the way through the product. Like you can hear that sound. That's the sound of it hitting the pillow. If I don't hit the pillow, maybe you can't even hear that. It's super quiet, but it's definitely, you can tell if you're stabbing through and down, which does remind me of a very important early lesson. Like, if you have any interest at all in needle felting, learn to stab down into a surface of some sort. I find that a lot of beginners, they want to work right here. And when you first start out, you could do this and you're being careful, so it's all right. But once you start getting used to what you're doing, it's super easy to stab through your project, and then you hurt yourself. So when I meet a fellow needle felter out in the wild, which happens a lot when I do my craft shows, right? But when I meet them, or someone who has at least some experience with it, they're always asking, how many times do I stab myself? And it still happens. But if you learn to stab down, then it'll happen a lot less. So we've stabbed that enough that it does not easily come back apart. I could tear it still. It's not super hard. And in fact, I could keep stabbing it until it's like half the size that it is right now, and then it'd be almost impossible to take apart again. But we don't quite need that level of stabbiness, if you will, just yet, because we're building up a layer. Now, you may wonder why I wouldn't just take a very big piece and just start stabbing that instead of starting with a little, bean size amount of felting. Well, it won't make a huge difference for a simple project like what we're doing today. But once you start doing more complicated sculptures, you'll find that having everything kind of compressed the same will help you later on when you're doing your top layers. if you just take a giant, if I took all of this and I just started stabbing at it, this might not be too bad since it's kind of a uniform roll, but if I just start stabbing at it, this part might get stabbed a lot and this part might only get stabbed a little bit. And so this will be denser over here than it is over here. And that'll just make all the shapes go crazy when you add your next layer. So it helps to just kind of have a medium firm base. There's definitely a lot of debate on how firm your felting should be. Really old school felters, because it's a very classic craft. An old school felter would kind of encourage you to make it rock hard. Now, the benefits of making it rock hard is that it's very unlikely for your sculpture to morph over time. It's too stiff. The disadvantages is that not only will you be felting forever and ever to make one little piece, but if your piece has, like, say, a leg in it, and the person who gets it doesn't realize that felting is a little particular, and they bend that leg, maybe they're testing out a different pose or something, it's kind of like stretching out a t-shirt. It'll never quite go back right. And the tighter your t-shirt, the more likely it is that you'll stretch it out all weird, right? So the same thing happens with different hardnesses. I don't think that's a word. Firmness. There we go. Different levels of firmness will basically stretch out different. Now, does that mean you should leave it super loose? No, because then it'll just unravel and it won't be, no one could handle it, pick it up, move it, play with it a little without ruining your piece. So you kind of have to find a happy medium. What would you say? A method of explaining the hardness to new people that I've heard often is to compare it to a steak, which makes sense for someone like me who's a foodie. I know what that person's talking about, but if you don't cook your own steaks, I feel like that doesn't help much. But anyways, the advice is that treat firmness like the different levels of doneness that you can get with a steak, right? If something's super rare, if your steak's super rare and you push on it, this would be kind of like more accurately a rare steak, it'll kind of indent a little bit, right? It'll be kind of squishy. Whereas if you have, maybe medium well done, which is probably where this guy's at right now, you can still push it in, but it resists a lot and it doesn't deform, right? So I could keep going and make this well done, but that's a little too firm, at least for this particular application. And especially considering that we still have a little more volume to go here. So this won't be the final firmness of it. The final firmness, here's one that's finished, and I do that kind of like squeezing. Maybe it's not well done, but it's medium well. So that'll be my final goal. So that, like I said, I get that analogy, but I wonder how useful it really is for people who aren't big on cooking themselves. The needle that I'm using right now is a 38 star, I want to say. Might be, no, it's definitely a 38 star. And there's so many different needles. My favorite supplier has something like, I want to say it's like 18 different needles. They have a lot of needles. And you do want a few different sizes. They have their own purposes, right? But I just can't imagine needing all of those different ones. But this is it's kind of on the fine side for a needle. Definitely not completely middle of the road, although it's my base needle. I also have a 40 twist, and this is a really tiny needle, so it doesn't really have a whole lot of impact, and this is better for like finishing, right? And then this guy is a 36 star. He's much beefier and probably the one I should be using right now. So I kind of lied in the beginning when I said I wouldn't use any other needles. I was just poking around and I'm like, why am I doing this with my fine needle? I know why. If I'm making a more complicated sculpture, I do want a lot of this base work to be done in a finer needle, even though it takes longer, because it just makes it that much more even. You know, like I said, for a simple project, you can kind of get away with areas that are maybe a little less dense or more dense than others, but I do some very big scale fancy projects. So it's a good habit, I guess, to start with a smaller needle, but these thick workhorse needles exist for a reason. Now, there is another option, needle-wise, if you wanted to go really fast, which I don't actually recommend, is a multi-tip. So the problem with the multi-tip is that it's so much needle that right now I'm more just pushing in the wool than I am actually moving the fibers into there. You really want the fibers themselves to kind of go in. And the reason for that is that to create felt from wool, right, to needle felt, what is happening is that this needle, you might not be able to see it on the camera, but it has little teeny tiny barbs on it, right? And those are going to catch like 1 or 2 pieces of hair at a time. And what happens is that, you know, you're stabbing down, so that little bit of hair that it grabs, it gets pushed in, right? So the needle grabs the hair and pushes it in. Well, then the hair gets kind of stuck, and because it's rough on a microscopic level, there's actually little scales on it, right? Those scales kind of get stuck on each other, and eventually you keep felting and they just, not quite like that, but they interlock and then they don't move. It works on the same principle that Velcro does. Have you ever seen Velcro? It has like kind of a curly bit, and then kind of a hooky bit, right? And their powers combined make something that sticks together, which is what's going on here. So like, again, I could tear it apart, and the center is much firmer than my outside. I gotta work on the edges here. But it's not like this where I can just easily like pull pieces off, right? I could still do it. Like, again, I could do it, but it'd be a lot more work. That's how you know it's getting nice and felted up. Speaking of felt, most of you probably, if you've been exposed to any kind of felt, may think of those like sheets that craft stores sell. It's kind of a popular material for making little kitty crafts. those are not made from any natural fiber. They're actually acrylic. So we don't use those, or I don't use them rather, in my creations. But they are modeled after actual wool felt sheets. And when you get wool that's kind of in squares like that, it is wet felted instead of needle felting. And basically, wet felting, instead of relying on a tool like this needle to move the hairs around, you're actually using the water and some soap typically to agitate those hairs so that they start to catch on themselves because they're getting tangled up in the water. So it's kind of like how your headphone wires would get tangled up in your pocket, right? It's just kind of the motion and the agitation that creates that. And at any rate, it's one of the oldest fabrics mankind has, because felt does not require any like loom or weaving. You can just, if you were to, shear a sheep and take that hair and put it in a bucket and like wash it really vigorously, it would turn into felt. Very rudimentary, not useful felt, but that's what would happen. So I like the fact that this is such a ancient art form, right? Now I'm just kind of making sure the thickness or the firmness is a bit more even. And any like really lumpy bit, I'm kind of poking down into itself. We're making a shape that's kind of like a river stone, just smooth and worn away and comfortably like handheld. I do actually sell these little blob monsters, and I will link you to the Etsy that I have. Kind of a rare self-promo right there. I don't usually do that. It makes me a little leery. I don't know. I guess because my ASMR family is different from my art family. They're both family still, but, I try not to bug you guys with a lot of marketing stuff, but just this once, I think it's okay to self-promote. Well, I might do it once or twice more, but sparingly. But anyways, I'll put that in the link below, or in a link in the description box below. There we go. Now this is a bit of a secret ingredient. You definitely, if you're gonna try doing your own blob monster, you don't need this step. But I'm gonna pick a spot in the middle and kind of make a little divot by felting really vigorously right there. And what this does is it adds a little bit of weight. And that's good for a couple of reasons. The first one being I do craft shows outdoors. So regular wool, it's pretty light. It can actually easily blow away in the wind if I don't add a little bit of weight to it. But also, it's kind of a cheat. It's a marketing cheat, because people associate weight with value. And this is still used. You'd think that consumers would understand that, certain fabrics are just lighter. And occasionally, you can get, that sense of quality from something being super delicate, right? But the average consumer wants something sturdy. It feels better constructed. It's not a bunch of plastic or whatever. A very famous modern example of this is Beats by Dre. It's a headphone company that is very popular kind of among, I'd say, younger inner city people. Although I might not be exactly their audience anymore. But very expensive headphones, and actually not that great for sound quality. They're not terrible, but they're not great. But they feel luxurious because they're really heavy for a modern headphone. Like you imagine that this was made with, really big quality standards because it's got some weight to it. Well, come to find out, they literally put weights into them. It's not made from thicker, better material. They grabbed some nuts and bolts like I did and screwed them into the headphones. And despite the fact that this is kind of well known at this point, their core crowd chooses to ignore the fact that they've been hoodwinked, I think. But it's weird. So like I said, it's good that these don't blow away in the wind. So it has, a practical purpose. Like a little bit of weight is really helpful. But at the same time, sometimes I feel a little guilty for adding artificial weight, if you will. A felt piece definitely doesn't need to have metal in it, other than my desire to make sure that it's not going to blow away. I suppose that's reason enough, right? And really, I don't. There is one other instance. Like, I'll put it in these really little light guys, right? I'll also do it if I'm making like a bipedal creature, like a peacock. And what I'll do is I'll put the weight right at the arc of their legs. And I do that because bipedal creatures, like in real life, they have muscles and tendons and, a very evolutionary specific spinal cord and musculature system that helps them keep balance. But if you're making that same shape out of wool, it's not going to keep balance the same, right? So I intentionally build it so that there's an arc. The legs are the base of it, but the metal, 'cause you make it with wire, the more complicated pieces, right? They have wire inside. And you make them with an arc. And if I put weight at the bottom of that arc, it kind of anchors it so that the piece is able to stand up. Still have to finagle it a little bit. It's not a cure-all for balance issues, but since I started doing that, I've been much happier with the way some of my standing creatures are able to stand, right? So, as you can see, even the simplest, this is the easiest thing I know how to make. And it still takes, a bit of time to do. It's something that if someone's not familiar with needle felting, but they've run across me, maybe my online store or at a craft fair, and they'll be like, man, that's kind of expensive. And, I just laugh it off because everybody has their own limits, what seems expensive. And I go, yeah, well, I try to pay myself at least $5 an hour because something like this little blob monster that I'm making right now, I only sell it for like $9. And it'll take me, I think the last time I made one start to finish, it was about 40 minutes altogether. This one hopefully will go a little faster, but since I'm recording, it'll probably go slower. we've got the weight in there, and everything is kind of a similar amount of firmness, and this is close to the final size that I want. This is a little soft right here. But now that it is kind of about right, the best way I could describe it. Now that it is about right, I'm going to go ahead and cover it in my nice, pretty, colorful wool. Now, if you're just starting out, right, you're actually interested in needle felting, you could just make the base out of this same wool. This is the MC1 blend from Living Felt, and it's fluffy, just like core wool would be. So if you're just starting out, there's no harm in that, and then you kind of save yourself a step because you don't have to now go through and cover it, right? But if you do a lot of sculptures like I do, the price difference really starts to add up. I think, I don't remember the exact prices of everything, but the core wool is $2 and some change per ounce, and the colored wool is just about $4. I want to say it's like $3.98 or something per ounce. So that dollar difference certainly adds up in the volume that I'm working in. I got to do one craft show since the pandemic, and it was a small craft show. It was kind of out in a little podunk town, touristy destination, one of those tiny little ones. And they said that they had a couple thousand people there. I'd be surprised if it was actually more than 1,000. But anyways, it was a decent show. I did make a profit, but compared to like pre-pandemic times, it wasn't super big, right? Even at a little show like that, I still sold like, let's see here, it's at least 40 pieces. Might have been closer to 60. I'd have to look at the numbers. Some of it was these guys, although not many, just a couple of these guys. You can hear me hitting that metal piece in there. It's the one major drawback to working with metal and wire in your pieces, because like pieces like this, they have wire in them. That's how, I kind of get it to stay in shape, right? Well, when it's this thin, you're almost always hitting wire, and it is, not only is it like kind of a shocking sound, you can get caught by surprise if you hit that very hard, but you can also break your needles by stabbing onto a piece of metal that you didn't realize was right there. And in fact, this guy is a little bent because I have hit a few things. Man, I got on a tangent and I forgot what my point was earlier about the selling. Anyways, the really small show sold, still quite a few pieces, mostly really simple ones. But when you multiply that dollar difference per ounce, and you saw how much white we used, it was quite a bit. It really adds up. So I guess what my moral of the story is that, to test it out and to make it less expensive, just pick up the color that you want the final product to be. And you can always buy core wool later and start using that. Doesn't make a huge difference as far as your ability to do any of the felting, right? as long as it's kind of fluffy like this stuff is. You know, the kinds that is more like teddy bear stuffing is the easiest to work with. I know a lot of kits, especially like low-end kits, they won't send you a good shaping wool. They'll actually send you, I have some of this off to the side here, something kind of more like this. And this is the hair. It's been dyed still and it's combed, but it's, you might not be able to tell, but it's very wiry. You know, whereas this, if I pull it apart, it's got like little short crimpy bits. This, if I pull it apart, has whole long hairs. And that kind of wool actually does have its use, but for making coarse shapes, it's like working on hard mode. I know some people that just use that kind of stuff exclusively, because then they don't have to have, you know, the same color in 3 different types of wool. I usually keep about 3 different types of wool. There's some variations and exceptions. So I do have a lot of wool, but you know, having the right wool for your application will make a difference. Right tool for the right job, right? Okay, so I've been at this for about a half an hour so far, and it could still use a little bit more tightening, but I think for the sake of speeding up the video a little bit, I will kind of do that off camera or after the fact, because I do want to show you kind of how we make the cute little face. So first, I'm going to go ahead and do his spikes or spine decoration. Lately, I've been kind of doing more of a wavy, like, I don't know, bubbly flame pattern. But I started out by doing more like standard spiky spikes. I think I'm going to do the wave pattern though. And this is just a piece of felt. This has been wet felted. And this is 100% wool, so not the stuff you can go down and buy at Hobby Lobby or Michael's. Although, if you look very carefully, sometimes they do carry real wool felt. I don't quite like the quality of the ones I can find in town, so I always end up buying them online. But just know, you know, if you're at Walmart and you see some felt sheets, they are probably just acrylic. They're not actually felt. So I'm just kind of testing, you know, each of these, even though they're all kind of that, you know, river rock stone shape, they're all got kind of a different level of roundness to them. And I did make a little mistake. This side is more round, so that's normally my top. But the metal, that nut that I added for weight is on this side, and we don't want to put the spikes on top of that. Not only is it annoying to felt around, but also the whole point is that it's gonna, you know, that metal is keeping it more like a paperweight, right? If you put it on the wrong side, it's not as helpful. So I do kind of want to just quickly round this out. Oop, and I just stabbed myself. There, good job. Just a little bit so that, I don't know, when you make your own blob monster, it can be any shape. In fact, I wanted to do a blob monster first because if I start a series, then it'll be good to have had like a basic shape, right? You know, for someone who's never heard about felting before, if I jump right into the fanciest thing I could possibly think of, you're not gonna get as much good information out of it, or at least useful to you, right? So figured it'd be good to start with something that was just super basic and mostly about stabbing. But also, if it's super basic like that, I'm able to talk a little bit more. Some of my more elaborate pieces, I'm not sure if I'd be able to do a video for them, honestly, just because it takes a lot of concentration. Okay, that's a little more round. Be a little bit better for my monster. So I'm just kind of testing how curvy it is. It's kind of got a bit of a sharp curve and then it flattens out a lot. So I'm just going to kind of do a shallow cut. I'm just going to kind of compare. It's actually pretty close to what I need. Maybe just a little bit more out of there. And I would say that matches the shape close enough. If you wanted to get really specific, you could kind of lay this on the side and like trace it and then use that as a pattern. But it's not really necessary unless you get bothered by things being a little off. When I felt, I'm kind of a fly by the seat of my pants filter. Nope, now I went too far. I should have just left it alone. Let's make that shallow again. Okay, that's close enough. We're just gonna stop right there. And I think I'm gonna do kind of that. No, you know what? I'm gonna do the spiky spikes. Let's do that. I was gonna do the bubbles, but I'm kind of feeling the spikes all of a sudden. And there's no rhyme or reason to where I'm putting them. One of the things the blob monsters are for, like today I used all fresh materials, other than this is a bit of scrap. But I mostly make blob monsters so that I can use up little bits and pieces of wool that otherwise are kind of floating around being useless, right? And in fact, I save a big old bag of scrap and mostly just kind of pull from that to figure out how I'm going to do my blob monster. I didn't do that for the video, mainly because if by some odd chance someone's actually learning how to do this, you wouldn't really have scraps, and working with scraps is actually harder than just pulling off fresh wool. I say fresh like it's gonna expire, but just means that I haven't like torn apart this structure, because when they send it to you, it's usually kind of like in a big old roll, and there's just a very specific way that all the hair is kind of formed by their process, and I want to maintain that, because knowing what direction everything is going in will help you on more complicated pieces. So now that this is about the right curvature here, I've got some black wool, and I'm going to pull out just a little bit. We don't need a ton of it for this first step. And I'm kind of like manipulating it, right? It's getting thinner, but closer to kind of matching that shape that we already have. And now I'm going to poke this onto the felt sheet. Now it's because of this step that I don't have to make that cut exactly right, because this is going to cover up any parts that may have been wrong. And the reason why we don't try to just felt the sheet onto the body without first adding some loose wool is that this is felted very, very firmly. You remember earlier when we were doing the test of like, can I pull it apart? This doesn't really come apart. You could, you know, if you really were determined, you could tear that apart, but it'd be hard, right? When it is that firm, you know, that tightly felted, you don't have a lot of hair that can be pulled through. You know, we're not using any glue, we're felting, you know, we're doing felt on felt. So I'm adding loose felt and pushing it. You can kind of see how it's starting to stick out the other side because it was grabbed by the needle and I've been pushing that way. Basically, we're going to use this loose stuff as the glue in a sense because it's able to kind of go into all the nooks and crannies and make this piece, this little headpiece here, more able to handle being felted onto our little guy. That's pretty good. This is really thin right at the base, so I'm going to kind of actually just fold it up and felt again. I am felting just on one side, so if I were to pull this up again, and you do want to kind of lift your work regularly, otherwise it'll felt into your mat and get stuck there. But if you kind of look at it at an angle, this side doesn't have a lot of fuzzy bits sticking out, and this side does. And what we're going to do is kind of utilize that. So I'm going to set it here and let this kind of fold over this way. And once I make sure it's kind of in the right spot, tuck it down, I'm going to felt into the center and down into the piece. So I'm kind of pushing that off to the side a little bit, right? And this is called tacking it on. So it's not a very solid felt job. This is just getting everything into the right place so that I can felt it more seriously later on. This is just to get it in the right spot. This isn't a very strong bond. I could easily tear that out. But now that it's tacked in, I'm going to go ahead and add more loose wool, you know, our glue wool, if you will, to this other side. And that's going to not only give us a nice smooth surface, but now we have fibers going this way and fibers coming back that way, so they all have more to grab onto. And this will let our bond be as strong as it can for the materials that we're working on. Obviously, it's not super glue, but assuming you don't hand this off to a 5-year-old that's just going to tear it up anyways, or goodness forbid, a puppy dog or something, it'll do just fine. And we're just gonna keep going back and forth, and that'll make this bond stronger and stronger. Now I think you can kind of see at this point why I think felting might be decent for ASMR, but why I also think it's not super entertaining on its own. I feel like this is very much like go to sleep, crunch, 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 kind of a noise. I have an Instagram that I post all my felting creations to, right? Poked myself. And obviously the format is more short videos. So I've been trying to do short videos. Mostly I do photographs. But but I've been trying to do some short videos, and you have to cut out a lot of steps, right? Just kind of like boop boop, now you have a thing. And I almost hate it. I almost hate doing that. I mean, of course, I just don't like extra work. But also, I feel like it gives people the wrong impression on how easy this is to do. It's not very easy. I mean, the concept of it is easy, but it's time consuming. Lots of labor. Labor of love, though. Now you might notice that I've pulled myself off to the side here. That's just so that I can kind of use this edge here to prop up his little spikes, and kind of keep my hand out of it so that I stop poking myself so vigorously. I don't know why, but that seems to be my word of the day, vigorously. Because I'm weirdo. And that could use a little more love, but I do need to wrap up this video here. I have an appointment to go swimming at 4. I thought this would go a little faster. It's kind of weird that now I can go swimming again. You know, they stopped that for a while when the pandemic first started, right? And now the city is letting us go swimming again, but you have to make an appointment. It only allows so many people in the pool and per each lane, so you have to plan ahead. And I love swimming. It's my favorite exercise. I swam all through high school, and it's kind of funny actually. I started swimming because it wasn't PE, or it counted as PE credits without going to like the standard PE class, and I hate regular PE. Oh my goodness, I hate it with a passion. Running and dodgeball and chin lifts, no, none of that for me, thank you very much. So I took a swimming class just for the PE credit, you know, non-standard PE credit, and found out that I am actually a pretty good distance swimmer. Like, I would never considered myself athletic. Even now, as I'm like starting to lose weight and everything, I've never been shaped like an athlete. So being good at a sport was weird and exciting. So I stuck with it all through high school. And in college, I ended up being a lifeguard and a swim instructor. I've been thinking lately about whether or not I would go back to being a swim instructor, you know, like part-time. I could do it, but you'd have to get a lot of certifications. All of mine have, you know, expired ages and ages ago. Now what I've done is I've made 2 kind of equal sized balls. I've filtered them down into the mat. This is going to be the basis for my eyes. And if you're gonna make eyes like this, there's lots of different ways to make eyes, but if you're gonna make these big like bug eyes, like I'm doing today, really, really make sure it's kind of firm before you put it onto your creature. Because if it's very soft, what happens is when you start doing the more like glue down, you know, felting, it'll start to deform your sphere. And the looser your wool is, the less dense your wool is, the more it'll deform when you add it to your critter. But these are good, you know, kind of medium well done. So I'm just gonna, well, first I'm gonna find that loose hair. Sometimes like people hair gets in these and they just hold on to it. But anyways, I'm gonna kind of find the spot that I want, and to start, I'm not gonna stab straight from the center. I'm actually gonna do some kind of like very shallow stabs here at the base where the sphere meets the green, right? Our main figure. And what that does is it's tacking it down again, right? We're kind of forming a loose bond before we go super extreme with it. But also doing these kind of shallow sideways stabs gets you to make sure the base and the eyeball are a similar firmness level, so that now I can kind of come through from the top and it's not going to indent my sculpture and it's not going to deform the sphere too much. And this is something I've learned more recently, honestly. When I first started, I thought I was being so clever. Like, it made sense to me to always felt from like the thickest part, because then you have more hair to grab onto, I guess. And I cringe at that logic now, because really, you don't want to just have it super thick in one area and not the others. But shallow sideways stabs, they're very good for all sorts of finishings. And you'll learn the more you do this, like what this does, you know, going straight down the center and through, is different from what this does, going basically from the side across. And you want a variety of strokes, so to speak. Because again, if we have fibers going this way and fibers going that way, they're more likely to kind of lock into each other and get all tangled up. Whereas if they're all going in the same direction, right, because you've only been stabbing from one side, then they're not really going to be as tightly woven. Woven isn't exactly the right word. We're not weaving here, but they just won't be as tangled up. That's a much better word, tangled up. So your bond won't be as strong. And that's the one thing, like, I get all like embarrassed about my old work, and everybody has to start somewhere, right? But I would have such loose sculptures that, you know, just the barest amount of like handling, and they'd like misshapen, or, you know, you could pull off a leg or something. You had to be very careful with them. And I sold those, you know, like in my earliest experience of felting, I was able to sell what I would consider garbage at this point. It's not really garbage, but I've learned how to do so many things so much better that it can be a little embarrassing to run across my really old fans, you know, that have been with me for the past 2 years. Hard to believe I've only been felting for 2 years, 2.5 now, almost 3. But it's such a big part of my life. Anyways, this little bit right here, you might have seen me kind of go off the eyeball. I noticed that it's very loose on this side. And I may have to go through with my promise here of just finishing it off camera, because I really gotta get moving here. So we've got our spheres on. They're pretty evenly sized. They're on there pretty good. That's the advantage of going at it from different directions, right? This will need to be fixed a little bit. It's a little loose at the bottom, but again, I'll do that later when time is not of the essence. So we're just going to finish off his little eyeballs and maybe give him a mouth, and we'll call it good. So for the pupils, you don't need a lot. It's really easy to grab too much wool. But I just want the barest little, like, you know, insignificant bit. And I'm going to kind of twist it up a little bit in between my fingers so that it's kind of like a little, you know, flint bunny, kind of what it reminds me of. And it doesn't have to be a perfect sphere, although I may want one that's just a tiny bit bigger than that. Yeah, that's a better size. I'm sure those don't seem all that different, but this is probably twice as much wool as that one has. And just because I'm going for like a big shocked face, that's my favorite for these guys. So it's loose. You could make it as a circle down here. I've seen some people recommend, making the circle down here. It gives you a little more control, but it feels like an extra step to me. So I just kind of build it up on the eyeball. And the way I do that is I very gently find kind of like the edges of my circle, and I tap that in, just a very light tacking. And then I kind of use the tip of my needle to sweep the fibers and push down again. So if I'm sweeping and kind of pushing down, I'm tightening it up and kind of rounding out that shape so that it ends up being a circle. Once I'm pretty happy with it, I get a little more firmer and push down. And you can kind of see right here it's indenting a bit. That's not really a problem. If you find that it's indenting a lot, then your eyes are probably not felted enough. You should go back and felt your, poke the eyeballs without the pupil more. Because, as you felt, you can even see it right now. See how it's getting just a tiny bit more flat? If I kept felting in one exact direction, I'd get really flat. Anyways, if you find your shape is not holding, then you need to do that more. Oh man. So now we're just kind of do the same thing. I'm going to find the edges of where I want that circle to be and just lightly kind of poking it in there, using the tip of my needle to kind of comb some of those loose hairs into the right spot. And now it's a circle, so I'm going to tap a bit more firmly. And voila, we have our pupils. He looks so startled. He doesn't know why you all have been watching him since the beginning of his existence. He's kind of mortified by, his whole life being a YouTube video. Maybe he's happy about it. Sometimes I don't know exactly what expression I'm going to give them until I just do it. Oh yeah, he's going to be happy about it, I think. Do I want happy? No, I don't want happy. Now another benefit of, doing those light taps like I did with the pupil and with the mouth is that if you just do it lightly, it's hardly felted on there. I can pull that whole bit off and kind of adjust. And I said I was going to do a shocked face in the beginning, so I think I'm going to stick with that. I do like happy faces too, but those big old white eyes, shock and horror, that fits better. So I'm just kind of finding the shape, kind of tucking it in. That's kind of like an open mouth scream of terror right there. So now that I'm confident in it, I'm going to push a lot deeper. And that'll make sure that the mouth is stuck on there and not easy to pull off like I did earlier. And I am kind of adjusting it a little bit as it gets pushed further in. You see how that black is now recessed. That just naturally happens because this is not super firm yet. So I'm just kind of adjusting some of the shape around his face as I push in so that it kind of matches up and is lined up. Yeah, that's a good little face. And with that, I think we're just going to call it good. So like I said, I gotta go swimming. I don't want to miss my appointment. I think this has been a long enough video. I was going to do more with it. There's so much to say about needle felting. Oh my goodness. But if you want another video, feel free to leave me a message in the comments below, right? there's definitely a lot more creatures I could make for you guys. But in the meantime, I'm gonna put a lot of links in this description. A link to my Etsy, where he'll be on sale. Well, not on sale, he'll be available for purchase. But he is one of a kind, so maybe by the time you watch this video, he'll be gone. We'll see. But anyways, I'll put up my Etsy and my Instagram and do all that like self-promotion stuff. And I'll also link you to some good resources in case you want to get into felting. Since this was an ASMR video, I dialed back, believe it or not, on the level of instruction that I could do, and tried to just make sure it flowed and felt more peaceful, right, than being in class. But if you want to learn more, there's definitely a lot of people who are teaching really good classes. So I'll leave links to all of that. In the meantime, we'll do our shout outs. Thank you to Lacey, Veronica Strom. I'm really bad at pronouncing things. Kates and Alan, just to name a few. Got lots and lots of lovely people, as evident by the fact that I'm having a 300 subscriber bonus video. You guys are awesome. So until next time, I will talk to you later. Nighty night.